Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. And today's topic, this violent Sudanese green card holder who tried to escape or basically fled out of the United States to try to get away from a particular murder trial that they were involved in. The embarrassment is beyond that this particular violent Sudanese type of violent criminality person who took the life of a particular woman and tried to escape to Canada. And the thing about it is, every day there are people within various sections of Americanism, various parts of Panama's culture. You even have some ones who have the nerve to come from certain parts of the ancient continent of Africa, the one that this applies to. They have the nerve, and I'm talking about the ones that are fleers, or that person's parents were fleers, and have the nerve to sit there and jump all over boats and planes and stuff like that to get to America, to escape from an ancient continent with all those riches and resources, and have the nerve to try to talk about American blacks who didn't sit there and help build Black America before many of these people would even thought of. I mean, there are some nervousness. And let me tell you what someone would do, because this is going to be a real quick show. Let me tell you what someone would do, because there are ones that are embarrassed that they fled from the ancient continent of Africa, right? The person's parents fled from the ancient continent of Africa. And again, I'm not talking about some of the small amount that came over to America to try to see if there's some opportunities, and they still stayed humble and stuff like that. But that's not a collectiveness that have done that, because the system makes sure to allow a certain types of African personnel, which I don't like even relaying over the generic African terminology in general, if less in some context, because Africa is over 50 plus countries, right? You have east, north, south, east, and west, and you got the central parts of various parts of Africa, several hundred languages, several hundred ethnic tribes. How many ones that have tribalism, right? But you got the one that applies to have the nerve when they flee over to America, the one that applies to, and then have the nerve to try to talk down to American blacks who are not tribes. Some people may not say, some people say, oh, well, American blacks are not monolithic. Yes, I disagree to a certain point. American blacks have a type of monolithic in the sense of that American blacks are not made up of tribes, right? So let me go ahead and share my screen and go ahead and get to this particular video.
A man accused of killing a young Reston mom is on the run tonight on the very day that his murder trial was supposed to begin. Police say the defendant recently fled to Canada.
Fairfax County prosecutors said it is exactly what they warned would happen after a judge first let the man out on bond, then later let him remove his GPS monitor. In a story you will only see on News 4, Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Julie Carey has reaction from the victim's family and the Commonwealth Attorney.
Mariam al-Mohammed al-Jabari was the mother of two young children involved in a relationship with Bal Salim Bal. On June 22, 2020, she was found dead in the apartment she rented in this Reston home. Bal, her romantic partner, later charged in connection with her death. Prosecutors say DNA in the apartment she rented in this Reston home. Bal, her romantic partner, later charged in connection with her death. Prosecutors say DNA and phone records clearly pointed to Bal as the killer. But now, bringing Ball to justice suddenly in limbo. Fairfax County authorities learned last week he'd failed to call into court services as required. They say Ball, who's from Sudan and still has family living abroad, fled to Canada as required. They say Ball, who's from Sudan and still has family living abroad, fled to Canada.
Oh, God, it's disappointing. I felt
Last week he'd failed to call into court services as required. They say Ball, who's from Sudan and still has family living abroad, fled to Canada.
Oh, God, it's disappointing. I felt really, and I still feel really, really bad for Miriam's family. This is a young mother who was murdered in her own home. This happened almost 5 years ago. We were very much looking forward to getting them accountability and getting closure.
Commonwealth's attorney Steve Toscano says this is what prosecutors warned could happen every time defense attorneys asked Judge Richard Gardner to give Ball more freedom while he awaited trial.
I'll tell you, we were worried about this from the beginning, and we really took every step that we possibly could legally to try to get this person in custody before trial because we were worried about just this.
Here's what court records show. Ball was indicted in October of 2020 on first-degree murder and strangulation charges. In November, the judge granted bond, but prosecutors appealed charges. In November, the judge and strangulation. Ball was indicted in
This.
Here's what court records show. Ball was indicted in October of 2020 on first-degree murder and strangulation charges. In November, the judge granted bond, but prosecutors appealed, and the Virginia Court of Appeals took their side, rejecting bond. But as the trial was delayed, defense attorneys asked again for bond in August of 2022. Again, the judge granted it, the Commonwealth electing not to appeal this time.
If we had a legitimate legal avenue to do that, we would have done it. But the law change in the intervening time means that we didn't have that ability.
Ball gaining even more freedom in February of 2024, the judge allowing him to remove his GPS monitor. The only remaining condition that he call in daily to court services. Friday, those calls stopped. Ball was gone. The victim's niece telling News 4 the family had prepared for the trial by taking time off work, booking flights and hotels, preparing emotionally. She writes in a statement, but then came the phone call that broke us. Our hearts shattered once more. The anguish and anger in our family were immediate and overwhelming. How could this happen? How could someone accused of such violence be allowed to walk free? We firmly believe this could and should have been prevented. This was a failure in the justice system that has caused our family immense and lasting.
Mm, mm, mm. But at the same time, you have personnel that will do this. As I was about to say before I was about to show that this video, this is what some other people would do. This is what some personnel will be doing. They see nothing, they hear nothing, and they know nothing, right? Now, see, if this was American Black, right, it'd be, oh my goodness, right? Oh my goodness, American Black male so violent, even though the number one person who commit the most crimes is certain numbers of males within the Padang-based culture, right? The person who commit the most crimes in general across the many types of criminality categories is personnel within the various parts of the Padang-based culture. But you got, in this system, has got to sit there and mix up people, including, unfortunately, some ones that have some black adjacent skin, right? And even unfortunately, some do come from certain parts of Africa, right? And that's some nerve of certain ones that come from certain parts of Africa, the ones it applies to, the ones that flee. Again, the one this applies to. So it's one thing when some come over the right way. And by the way, he actually was a permanent resident, lawful permanent resident, a green card. Yes, yes, he had a green card. So, however mixed up scenarios however situation, and he was granted a green card. And again, you see what he did to, I guess, his girlfriend or fiance or whoever she was, right? And then again, fleed. Mhm. But at the same time, how many people had not even heard the story? But again, you have some person that have some nerve from certain parts of the ancient continent of Africa who have the nerve to try to talk about Black Americans when Black Americans built America more than anybody else, besides certain one people within predominant culture. Otherwise than that, nobody else comes close to building up America for generations than American Blacks. Prior to year 2000, you start looking at the demographic numbers of various personnel from Africa. It was extremely minute, especially around the 70s and 80s, when you start having a few extra ones come from certain parts of Africa. Extremely minute, right? And then you start getting to the 21st century when the gates open up a little bit more to allow certain parts of certain ones within certain parts of Africa, the ones applies to be a different kind of buffer, right? A bit different kind of black skin adjacent buffer. But here's the crazy part. Black Americans are not supposed to say bring up anything about certain parts of Africa. But there are certain personnel from certain parts of Africa can flee over to America and they have the nerve to sit there and try to talk crazy about Black Americans. There are some ones that got some ish pretty confused, right? What was that? What was that, Dr. Spot? Some of the numbers of fleers that have the nerve talking about American blacks, and you had situations like this where there's criminality from this criminality, Sudanese black adjacent personnel, right? And you had some little foolish ones that be like, oh my goodness, you know how those Black Americans be talking about Africans, but same people, right? They don't talk about the numbers of African people who sit there have a dire disdainment and hatred for Black Americans who don't flee, right? But see, when you sit there and got them, they be like, it's not all. See, there are good numbers of African brothers and the various ones, right? Not the genericalities, because it's like if you really want to play that, you like, when did Africa become Africa, right? It's almost kind of a technically disrespectfulness because what about the personnel uh, that don't even call themselves Africa in Africa, right? No, 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 no. We are tribes first. Don't just call us African first. No, no, no. We were tribes before the word Africa came into existence, right? But anyway, a whole different topic in itself, right? But it's still an insult to American blacks when you have certain types of personnel within certain parts of Africa, the one it applies to, the ones that flee to the United States, right? Fleeing from personnel that look like them in various sections of Africa that couldn't stay in Africa, right? The various personnel. I'm talking about the ones who have the chameleon nonsense, right? Insultingness, black adjacentness to sit there and hide under the black banner, right? But at the same time, sneak back out, right? Oh no, no, no. When things get heated toward Black Americans of black pain, right? They ran off, they go somewhere else, they go sneak back into their own tribes, right? Practice tribalism. And how many numbers of African personnel in various types of tribalism, they bring that tribal stuff in America that they can't even stand other different parts of Africans in the United States. You don't sit there and see African personnel jumping up and down to each other and have going to a little festival here and there does not count, right? Because when they go to those festivals, they segregate themselves back into their certain types of African enclaves, right? But ones that want to sit there and insult American blacks, that has some nerve. Yes, that's what it is. What do you mean? What do you mean? Yes. But ones have the nerve to talk about American blacks, can't fix certain situations in various sections of Africa, right? But ran over and fled over to America. Again, it's not about numbers of good ones from certain sections of various parts, certain sections of Africa. We're not talking about them. So we're not going to play that little tactic, right? So let me go ahead and share my screen for this last particular part. Let's make sure I share that. See that part? Okay. So CBP arrests violent Sudanese citizen for failure to appear at murder trial. U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers at the Port of Buffalo Peace Bridge border crossing arrest a citizen of Sudan, lawful permanent resident of the United States, who had an active warrant out of Fairfax County, Virginia, on June the 13th, 2000. Whatever this was. June 13th, 2025. Basically, CBP officers encountered Salim Ahmed, whatever this is, Ball, a 29-year-old male Sudanese citizen, entered the United States as the sole occupant in a personal vehicle. Ball indicated that he was in Canada for a few days visiting friends. During Ball's examination, CBP officers discovered a National Crime Information Center matched that indicated that he had an active warrant for his arrest. Subsequently, the Sudanese violent man, was taken to the secondary inspection area by CBP officers to verify the warrant. During the secondary inspection, CBP officers verified Ball's identification and confirmed that he had an active arrest warrant from Fairfax County, basically enforcement place, for failure to appear for murder trial on the original charges of first-degree murder and strangulation. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. But at the same time, right, you got certain ones in certain parts of Africa that have some nerve to sit there and try to talk about American blacks, have no clue about real Black American history, right? Ran over and fled over from various parts of Africa, trying to get away from people that look like them, right? Risking lives to go across that Mediterranean Sea, right? Coming across harbor borders and things like that to get to El Norte from southern cross of the border. Yes, how many certain ones from certain parts of Africa are legal immigrants? Oh, that's a whole different topic we don't want to talk about. So, one last question is, where are those various sections of the hateful ones from certain parts of Africa that having hatefulness toward American blacks, and American blacks ain't did nothing to them, right? American blacks are not fleeing to Africa, right, and doing podcasts and going on people's shows and insulting Africa, which makes no sense in the first place. Because first of all, that's not going to be allowed. Second of all, again, this is why supremacist is the most awesome mental manipulation force that's ever existed. Because when you say Africa, again, several hundred languages, several hundred tribes, right? Several dozen countries, tribalism in various ones, right? And you have personnel that just say generically Africa. This is why supremacy is the most awesome mental manipulation force that has ever existed. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP Show.